Education Incorporated, who's going to talk to us a little bit about design thinking. So, been excited about this one, Ben. Take it away. All yours.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. I'm excited to be here. I'll introduce myself a little more. My name is Ben Laptad. I am a manager of our online professional development program at Strategic Education Inc. But I have worn many hats over my years. As I was talking to folks earlier, I started through Teach for America. I then taught at a charter school in the Research Triangle area. And then I worked for a nonprofit that helps students become consultants and practice working in teams to solve complex problems. So I'm going to be bringing about some of my anecdotes from the years and also some of the research to talk to you about how we can use design thinking in order to solve problems in a variety of education settings. So to get started, my format is that I love interaction. I already see that folks are interacting in the chat here, so it is great to see that along the way. Feel free to ask questions along the way or interact through chat. We'll also have a couple of polls, and in the last 15 minutes, we'll have question and answer, where I would love to hear your thoughts and your questions, and Todd and I can have some discussion around those as well. Also wanted to give a heads up that at the end, I will be asking for y'all to share a golden nugget from this session, meaning what is one thing that you're taking away, that one shiny thing that of all the different rocks in the mine, you're taking away this piece of gold that's applicable to you and your context. So I look forward to seeing what some of those are in the future. And I also recognize that each of you are coming from a variety of different spaces, a variety of different roles. So I wanted to go ahead and launch a poll real quick to see what is your role at your institution. So we have this first poll question here. You might see two questions, but we'll just do the first question initially. So what is your role at your institution? Awesome. I see faculty members, some support staff. All right. Support staff, what roles are you taking on? You instructional designers or technologists? You want to put that in the chat? Instructional technologist. Awesome. Thanks, Jill. Instructional coach. Excellent. I see another instructional designer. Awesome. So I designed today's presentation and conversation to be applicable to everyone. So hopefully everyone gets a little nugget that you'll take back to your setting. Excellent. I wanted to frame this, of course, with my teaching experience through an essential question, something to get you all thinking about your previous experience in your context. So I want you to think about a time when you solved a complex problem for the people that you serve. So if you're faculty members, those students. If you're an instructional coach or instructional technologist, designer, your faculty members. Who do you typically solve problems for in your work setting? And I want to have you reflect on what was your approach to determining the root cause of that problem, not just the surface level symptoms that seem to pop up and always get in the way and kind of flood our thinking. But with this complex problem, what was the root problem, and how did you go about solving that problem? So you don't have to put that in the Zoom chat. You don't have to shout it out right now. But I wanted to get you thinking about that as we go into our session, as design thinking is a framework and mindset for problem solving. And I went ahead and shared the results. You all can see in here that we have a majority of folks are faculty members. We have lots of support staff, others. Awesome. We do know from the cognitive science of learning research that people learn new things better when it evokes emotion and not just intellect. So I wanted to tell you a story about complex problem solving from my experience as a former high school teacher at Research Triangle High School. And so you can see here are some of my former students. We're in a course called District C, which is a nonprofit that helps students work together to solve complex problems to be ready for future careers that require just that. And this is a group of four who's talking about this through the lens of a business partner that we have. So they weren't just solving problems that we came up with within our school, but we actually connected with businesses in the area who had authentic problems that they wanted a fresh look at the problem. Sometimes we get so bogged down in our environment, the politics, how we usually do things, that having a fresh eye, even from high school seniors, can provide a lot of value. And that is what happened here. So I want to tell you this story. This business client that they had is actually a museum in the Research Triangle area. They host over 465,000 visitors each year, and they had 11 indoor exhibits that they created. And these exhibits were ever changing. So in one season, they would have one exhibit, and then they could take a bunch of materials out of their basement in order to create the new exhibits. And the inventory is accessible, but for all staff. But because the museum lacked a process for managing the workshop's inventory, the design team who created these exhibits felt that they were inefficiently using production time to search for supplies. And you all can probably see that in here. As a very orderly person, you have to be an educator oftentimes. This made me spin around. But what was interesting is that my students thought that this was just a cleanup project at first. So they were like, hey, why are we coming in to just clean up a space? Can't they hire someone to do that for them? But what they soon realized was that it was a lot more complicated than that. And if you want to guess as to why it might be more complicated, humans, the people who are involved. We have our own unique experiences. We have our ways of doing things, our ways of operating and interacting with each other. It's not just the present that matters, but also our history of interactions with other people that matter. So the students found that it's not just cleaning up, but also there was a lot more to be discovered in order to really help solve the problem for their client. And so they went around, they interviewed the managers and the design team members, and they also sent out a survey to the design team to try to gather a little bit more information about what they preferred in a solution. And so this was a survey question that they asked. It reads, in a perfect world, how would you organize the basement? And I love this first answer. I'm not joking you, this was the very first response on their survey. It says, my way. So someone responded, hey, no further elaboration, but they wanted their way to be respected. Another person here responded, dedicated locations for all storage of parts and consumables. So they wanted specific places throughout the space to be for equipment, for the consumable materials. While even another person said that they wanted these materials spread out to the different workstations so that they could be at one workstation and have access to a variety of things. So this might be sounding familiar to you in terms of either the students who you work with or even some of the faculty members that you work with, right? Everyone has their own ways of operating, some preferences, some experiences that inform how they want to continue in the classroom or as a team. So be thinking about that as we move forward. And as my students got this data from their partners, they realized that it wasn't just the cleanup project, right? They they created this point of view statement that reads, the museum design team needs a way to reestablish trust, structure, and communication. Something that really stands out here to me is that trust piece. Because after they had surveyed and talked to some of the people at the museum, they realized that because of the lack of organization and miscommunications that were happening, that people were losing trust with one another. And so this was leading to deeper problems of people being dissatisfied with their work in that setting. And so they created this point of view statement and as a means of framing what problem they were actually going to be solving. And they then went from there and ideated possible solutions with the team. They did some research about best practices for warehouse organization. And they didn't just follow each of these ideas, but they analyzed them to see, hey, what might resonate with the people who we've talked to? Based on the space that we're looking at, what might work? And so they jotted that down together. And they started to create a system that was designed for their users, for this design team, taking into account their preferences. And so you can see here, there are some spaces that really needed to be worked on, some that were manageable, others that were structured, but they redesigned some of this space. And they didn't stop with the design there. We actually took them to the museum again for a second time, and they created these bins, or they brought in these bins with some labels on them. So they organized the space. They created a whiteboard with some of the folks' names on it in the design team, and even designed a magnet system for the people to put the names of the equipment on there and move them around as they were being checked out. So all of this was taking into account those things that were important to the folks who worked there. But as they tested this out, they ran these ideas by the design team and realized that their solution wasn't perfect yet. So they gave the design team gave feedback of, hey, the method is feasible, but we need to order better materials. I like it, but it's going to get busy at times, and I don't know how the magnets will be during the busy times. And even one person saying, hey, fasteners and other small tools, those consumables shouldn't be on there. So what the students did here was they created a prototype, tested out that prototype with their users, and got some feedback in order to enhance their solution. And so it was a great process. They pitched this to the museum manager, and this was right before COVID hit, so they were going to present this to some of the other folks on the design team, but went through a valuable process that came out of Stanford's D School, their design school. And Stanford created a 5-step method for design thinking that has since been translated over to Google. Google has a creative skills for innovation lab where they teach teams and individuals how to think creatively and innovate using design thinking. And even IBM, another place in the triangle, developed entire courses and certification programs that use design thinking. And they attribute a 301% return on investment due to the processes that they changed using design thinking. And then beyond that, you see design thinking popping up in schools. So Harvard has a design thinking class. A variety of programs across the country that are integrating this as its own course or program, or even as methods for solving their own problems. And so I was actually brought in when the pandemic hit to UNC. I see a message in the chat. It's another lacking area, metacognition last session, and organization. Thank you, is a source of failure. Right. So I see that message in the chat, trying to find what are the things that are sources of failure and how can we address those. So back to this, UNC Chapel Hill students actually had internships lined up for the summer of 2020. And when the pandemic hit, they lost a lot of those internships because companies were trying to refocus and even survive. And so I was brought on through the District C program to coach UNC Chapel Hill students through a design thinking virtual internship. And in here, we got some great feedback at the end of this 8-week internship that the student suggestions were straightforward, measurable, easy to implement, solid research and investigation were done along the way. So I love this because it's kind of framing in terms of, hey, if students can do these things, then can we take the time to solve our complex problems using some kind of design thinking related framework? So I want to revisit this essential question. Think about a time when you solved a complex problem for people you serve. What was your approach to determining the root cause and solving the problem? Think about that in relation to some of the things that you have heard. Now, I'll move forward with some specifics for design thinking. Here is the framework that is essentially out of Stanford's design school. Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So these are 5 steps that you could take. They might be called different things or shortened. I think IBM has 3 steps. The empathize phase is oftentimes called understand phase, so trying to understand. But it's really this kind of convergence and divergence in thinking, to where you empathize with your users by trying to collect data, trying to understand their experiences and what is important to them. So for you all, your users might be your students, right? Your faculty members. What is important to them in terms of a problem that they're currently experiencing? And how are you going to get information about that? So in this empathize phase, you diverge and go out and get more information about your users. And so here are some ways that you can do this. Many of you who research already doing this in your research. But these are some things that my students use to gather that information, right? The mini interviews, you can do focus groups. Bring in a group of students and say, hey, I'm going to give you extra credit if you attend this Zoom session where I can just get some feedback on our course. You can send out a survey and offer bonus points as incentive to learn about solving an issue for your students. And even observation. So this is a really interesting one, actually. Oftentimes with institutions that we serve, we hear that students really struggle with going into their course room, navigating and understanding where to go throughout the course. So in the online settings, like, how can you overcome that for students? How can you get them through that hurdle? And in an empathize stage, where you're trying to understand what issues your users are having, you might have them share their Zoom screen and then prompt them with questions of where to go. So for example, if you sent an announcement the first week and were like, hey, I remember your assignment is due week 3. If you ask them to go to that assignment, then have students share their screen and watch them as they're trying to navigate. So you might find out some of the hurdles that are getting in the way of students navigating to those spots by giving them specific prompts and observing where they're going. So a variety of different options here. And I'm curious to know about you all. And this was a poll that I had here. What is the primary way you have sought to understand the needs of people for whom you have solved problems? So I'm actually going to reopen this poll real quick. All right, you're going to see the same 2 questions. And so if you all wouldn't mind going to that second question again and answering, what is the primary way you have sought to understand the needs of people for whom you have solved a problem in the past? Awesome. I am seeing several responses for casual conversation, interviews, and surveys. Excellent. And at this time, I would welcome someone to actually unmute and tell us briefly what's the context of a problem that has occurred, and how did you gather information about your user? Would anyone like to share?
I've got one example, Ben.
Yeah.
It's not a teaching example, but it's one that first came to mind. I'm
Sure.
retired from the federal government, and I used to work at a federal prison in San Diego.
Okay.
And when I was there, we had a problem, and it had to do with inmates who were being unnecessarily delayed and getting x-rays and getting physicals done before they could have their initial appearance, because San Diego has an inordinately high tuberculosis rate, and the courts didn't want the inmates in their court until they'd been screened for tuberculosis.
Okay.
Okay. But usually you do a skin test on that, takes 3 days. So the quickest way to get it done is through an x-ray. But there was a variety of different reasons on why those couldn't x-rays be read in time, et cetera. And it was becoming a Rule 4 issue, and defense attorneys were jumping all over it, and we were getting cases dismissed.
Mhm.
So, but I was the associate warden. I had just shown up, and I had no idea how to solve the problem, because in government work, and I'm assuming it's the same way in academia, fairly new at this, but usually when you give somebody a problem or you present a problem, people don't tell you how to solve the problem. People tell you all the reasons why your solution won't work. Okay. So
Hmm.
you get reasons on why it won't, why, well, that's not going to work. Okay.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so what I did is I decided to use that. So I would ask them, well, why doesn't this work? And they would explain it to me. So then I would go to the next conversation. Why is this not going to work? Well, they would explain that to me. So
Hmm.
the idea is to, I didn't try to come up with a new problem. I
Hmm.
came up with solutions to the individual ones. And basically what I did is eliminate their reasons to not allow the new program to work by addressing all their concerns. So it's kind of like in reverse. It's like peeling the onion backwards and
Hmm.
just removing the obstacles to the new procedure or to
Yeah.
the new problem.
Yeah.
So it seemed to work. It seemed to work well in that environment to uh, basically listen to the needs of what or listen to the concerns that people had, address those issues, and try to eliminate obstacles.
Absolutely, and that's really interesting because oftentimes, like you said, we jump to the solution making, and our solutions get shut down. So this phase in the initial problem solving is all about listening, right? Just stopping, asking questions, and listening. And what I have found is sometimes I'll ask a question when I'm trying to solve a problem, and I'll kind of listen to an answer, but then I'll go on to the next question that was on my mind. And I've had to intentionally slow down and ask questions about what the person had just said previously. So rather than digging 10 shallow holes and trying to solve the problem, I was trying to dig one deep hole by continuing to ask this, potentially the 5 whys, right? Why to get to the root source of the problem. And that started to help me.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, go
every
ahead.
problem has a history, and so you deal with that. So you try to deal with that history.
Absolutely. And same with our students, right? They're coming in with preconceptions based on their high school experience. So we have students who think that school is supposed to operate in a certain way. They might not be used to some of the self-paced video watching reflections, some of the things that we might be asking them to do in the online setting, because they're coming in with the preconceptions of what that looked like in their high school experience. And so the more that we can understand about our students and identify those problems that our subset of students are experiencing, the more we can tailor solutions and make changes based on our students' needs. So thank you so much for sharing there. Excellent. I'll go ahead and end this poll and share the results so you all can see that the majority of folks end up trying to understand the needs of the people they're serving through casual conversation, right? Which is an absolutely great way to do that. Just talking to a student after class has ended can be a great way to say, hey, I was curious about this. Can you tell me more? I do see a hand raised. Yeah, go ahead, Anton.
Yes, I just wanted to mention another thing that I've done in the past that we have at our institution.
Uh-huh.
We have groups of students that are trained to provide feedback to faculty. So the students have been taught about different forms of pedagogy and how they could be used, and which ones have more research behind them and so on. And faculty can request that these, we call them SCOTs,
Hmm.
they come into the classroom, we
Mm-hmm.
leave early, and then they can do a focus group with the class. They can summarize the results for us.
Mm-hmm.
We can ask them to pinpoint specific areas that we are concerned with.
Hmm.
That has proven very helpful to me. When I first went online, which was a number of years ago, um, I did that because I had never taught online before. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had the Scots actually go into my Canvas course and look at the course, give me feedback about what was confusing or what didn't make sense, um, both from their perspective and from the perspective of the students that they interviewed. And so that's another kind of approach that it takes a lot of institutional effort to
Right.
create those teams and train those students.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really a worthwhile type of thing to do.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Dr. Tolman. And like you said, that can be a huge help to have institution-wide systems to help you get feedback. And it sounds like you all are opting into students doing that for your course, so it's not like a mandated audit for students to do. But in relating this to others, there are ways in which you can do this at your individual classroom level, right? You could take some of those questions that are most important to you, or even look at where students are struggling in the gradebook. If it's a particular project or unit, then have students come in, whether that is over Zoom to do a focus group, say, again, hey, here's an incentive, here's a bonus points to come in and give me some feedback on what it was about this unit, what it was about this project that was a hurdle that got in the way. And so whether it's a systematic way at the institution level or an individual way in which you're responding to students' data, anyone in here could potentially do that in your setting. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I'm seeing course analytics and LMS are helpful. Oh, absolutely. Midterm surveys, exactly. And once you get their information, of course, afterward, tell them about how you changed the things based on the data they provided so that they know that their time was worthwhile. So I'll move forward and kind of go over these next parts of the design thinking framework according to Stanford's D School. The second phase is the define phase. So I talked about diverging and converging, right? In empathize, you're diverging. You're going out and getting information about the problem from your users. Then after you have that information, after you analyze it and find themes, you can come together and converge. Define what is your point of view now that you have this data, right? This isn't to say that you're determining the exact statement that is set in stone, this is the exact problem, but your point of view based on the information that you've gathered so far. And there are ways in which you can set up this statement. I'm thinking about who are you designing for, what is their deep unmet need, and why is that important to them? So use that sentence frame. Here was the point of view statement that my students decided for this museum, right? Museum needed a way to reestablish trust, structure, and communication because valuable time was wasted, leading to distrust among the staff. What is your point of view after collecting this data? This might be from interviews. Students need more technology in synchronous sessions because they're not participating in discussion. This was something that when I taught in kind of a hybrid school where we were doing some of the in-person, some online, I thought that introducing technology would be the thing to get students to interact more online. But when at one point in time, I tried all three of these tools at the same time. I introduced a Padlet, which is like an online bulletin board to get students talking to each other and responding to visually appealing prompts. I did polling in the session, and I even did a Google Jamboard as a whiteboard and had students respond on that Google Jamboard. And yes, I tried to use all of the things, and what it turned out to be was my students were like, hold up, this is too much. And so I had to learn from them that the technology shouldn't drive the learning, right? I should still focus on those principles of teaching, such as, hey, what are your learning outcomes? What are the assessments that will measure those learning outcomes? And then is one piece of technology that might help your students get there? So don't overload with technology, but instead choose potentially in the classroom setting a piece of technology that might help solve a particular problem. And so through that experience, I determined, hey, it's not about the technology. It's about students needing more opportunities for reflection and peer-to-peer interaction online because they feel insecure about their responses in the virtual environment and desire peer collaboration. So it went from, hey, this is how I engage students, to me listening to students, me asking them what it is that they're looking for in a class and determining, hey, I can use breakout rooms to have students get to talking to one another, and then come back in the main classroom setting, and then they might be more willing to speak to their thoughts. So the third step is to ideate. So we've gone from empathize, you're diverging, define, you're converging. Now that you've defined that point of view statement or problem statement, you're diverging again to ideating. What are the ways in which you can address the root of the problem? Not the band-aids, not the, oh, they're bored, so they need some technology thrown in there, but the real root of the problem. And in this ideate phase, you generate as many ideas as possible. So one tangible way in which you might do that with a team, whether that's you by yourself doing this on your own, or maybe you're working with a team of other instructional designers and you're thinking, hey, we have this point of view statement, where do we go from here? You might create some how might we questions. So take your point of view statement and break it down. Ask, how might we provide opportunities for reflection? How might we create an environment that allows peer-to-peer interaction? How might we reduce students' feelings of insecurity? Asking those questions that make sure that your solutions address what was written in that point of view statement. Otherwise, we can go off the deep end and end up solving problems that aren't the actual problem at play. And then, of course, brainstorming. Here is a Padlet that's from one of our workshops, and we have workshop participants answer how they already engage students in each of these different ways, through the course shell, through grading and feedback, a variety of different ways. So we have them brainstorm those ways. We set a time limit to give people that time in order to fully sink in, and have them comment on this Padlet to brainstorm. So trying to get as many ideas out there as possible to address the problem. Another way of addressing problems is through research and informal training and understanding. And so something that you might do is kind of like you're doing right now, attend conferences or attend professional development. We do have a professional development that's coming up over creating and delivering engaging online courses using evidence-based practices. So SEI is partnering with ITLC, and that is happening in June. So I see Catherine saying yes.
When in June?
Oh, yeah. Catherine or Todd, do we want to speak to that at this point, or do we?
So actually, yeah, if you want to go to the itlcnetwork.org, we have some information on that page with dates and times and what cohorts look like and that sort of thing.
Awesome. Thank you, Melanie.
Yeah.
So yeah, feel free to check that out. We have some discount codes for you as well. But come to get 8 synchronous sessions with a small cohort to where we can talk more about best practices in the online setting. And then finally, we're getting to our prototyping and testing phase. And I, of course, am obsessed with chocolate. Prototyping is kind of like putting together your testing phase, right? Bringing together those ideas that you came up in the ideation and knowing that, hey, I might not put enough sugar or baking soda or whatever it is in this cake at first, but through some experimentation here, I can figure out, oh, after I tested it, I need a little bit more sugar. I need a little bit more. Clearly, I don't bake much because I'm not saying all the ingredients of the cake properly. But you get the idea. It's all about iterating, prototyping, testing, and going back to your prototype. So in terms of online teaching, I have a couple of examples here. This was a first discussion board post for a psychology course that we created. Simply define psychology, describe a topic you want to learn more about and why. And this was good at first, right? We found, you get students talking about what is at the center of the course and connecting it to their personal lives. But You'd get the student who would put in 2 sentences, right? We didn't define parameters for them. We didn't provide additional information, or even like, these are not the most exciting prompts to answer. And so over time, we iterated. We asked students, hey, what else can we learn here? We did some research, not just applying to their personal lives, but also their professional lives. Share how it applies to your future career. We established some expectations. Hey, we're not going to use Wikipedia here, and be sure you put 1 original response and 2 responses to other students. So again, totally fine to start with this place. I know many of us got thrown into online teaching because of the pandemic, and we just had to make things work. But through some design thinking, through testing things out with your students and getting feedback, you could ultimately iterate your curriculum to where you are providing that robust discussion post. I did a flipped classroom whenever I was teaching. So some of my first videos, I was looking back at them. Here's a 15-minute video on proteins and protein synthesis, and it was okay. It was all right. But over time, I discovered, even through looking at some of the research, that videos that are less than 6 minutes are much more likely to sustain students' attention than those that are in this 15-minute range. And I saw that, even though this is my older video, it only has 98 views on YouTube, whereas this less than 5-minute one has almost 500 views. So my individual data is supporting this as well. So again, last thing about this would be sending announcements that students actually read. Some of my initial announcements, hey, had great information in them, but when I asked students, hey, did you see this? No, they didn't take the time to read 2 paragraphs in the middle of their day without any bolding or features to accentuate this. So that's when I learned some more methods about, hey, can you create titles that are larger? Bold the things that, of course, you want students to stand out to students. Record a quick video, again, less than 5 minutes, to walk through students through a particular instruction, and even number things out if there's a sequence that students should follow thereafter. So it went from starting here to listening to my students, looking into some of the best practices, and modifying things thereafter. So that is design thinking in a nutshell. My perspective on that. Here, these 5 steps, again, that diverging of empathizing, going out there, learning about the problem, converging in defining the problem, diverging in ideating many solutions, converging by taking multiple ideas that you think might fit well and creating a prototype, and then testing out that prototype with your users again. You converge, you diverge, and then you circle back around to improve your product, your class, or your offering. So at this point, I know we only have about 5 minutes remaining, but I welcome questions, discussion, whether that's Todd, whether that's folks who want to put something in the chat. Feel free to ask away.
And perhaps be thinking about that nugget that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we can even go to that right now. We'll give you all, or did I hear someone who was about to speak?
Yes, this is Catherine Cassidy. I just had a question for you, please.
Sure.
Okay, so I was really interested in how you said, you know, the organizational piece, because that's where I find a lot of struggle. Like, generally, I see my scholars following whatever they happen to learn in their home environment. So could you speak to that a little more, please? Like, do you actually teach them how to outline or take notes or keep an organizer to stay on top of their projects and responsibilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when you're referring to your scholars, are you referring to your students?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yes, so what I especially found out from implementing a flipped classroom was that my students, and granted they were in high school, but even upper levels of high school, still needed to have some of these things modeled for them. So they were used to learning through in person. The teacher would give a lecture, perhaps have some discussion during that lecture. But when you're learning from short videos, it's a different style, it's a different intake, and when students aren't used to doing that, whether it's learning from videos or navigating a learning management system on their own, it can be great to have that modeled for them. So in a synchronous session, I would go through, hey, I understand that this is the sequence of assignments here. By the way, if you're having trouble with watching a video and taking notes, we can go over that in office hours, and I'm having those office hours during this time. And that way, if it were a college setting, you could have students come in and you could model that for them. You could have a Cornell Notes template and show what that might look like to watch a video and engage actively, asking themselves questions as they're listening to the video. So it depends on your students, their background, what level of preparation they've had prior to coming to you, as to how much you want to model.
Oh, thank you. I love those teacher think alouds,
Mhm.
where you model and kind of show them, but sometimes if they're not responsive, you don't know if you're going too deep or, which way you're going. But thank you for speaking on that.
Yeah, of course. And you can always do pulse checks as you go. So if you're on Zoom with your students, you can have them use the reactions tool and ask them a question like, hey, how's the pace? And then they might put a thumbs up if it's good or a no if they need you to slow down. And in that way, it's a quick nonverbal way of students communicating how they're doing and how they're receiving some of that information as they're going throughout your session.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Well, we have like 2 minutes left. There's a couple of things here in the chat, Ben. I was going to check.
Awesome. So let's see here.
There's one on how you negotiate with higher ups who say this is the problem without first ascertaining they are correct. That was an interesting one. Or Ian's got one too, is issues of scale for implementing the framework.
So regarding Brian's question about you suggestion on how to negotiate with higher ups. This is the problem without first ascertaining they are correct. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that has to do with kind of like personal relationship. I have done some project management training in the past and understand that in order to make change in an organization, you need champions for change, champions who are close to the decision makers. And so if you know of someone who is close to a decision maker, a higher up, and you're able to get coffee with them and say, hey, here's this institutional problem that I'm seeing. Here's the data that reveals my perspective on this. What are your thoughts on this? And then perhaps by connecting with those in the network, you might be able to bring about influence on those who are the decision makers. It's an interesting question. And then, yeah, in terms of scale, that is a great question. Could you conceivably use the same model with wicked issues, for example? Not exactly sure what wicked issues would be, but if you'd like to.
Sorry, the lingo and education, right? The idea of a wicked question is just like this big thing. There's no one right answer, and it potentially is recurring. So, like an example of one would be like, how do you solve gun violence? Is a wicked question. And so, like, how do you see this framework sort of applying to something like that? And on such a broad spectrum, involving so many potential stakeholders.
Yeah, no, that's a great question because that's part of the mindset that we teach students at the beginning of this is that they're so used to having one right answer whenever they're taking exams or going through a course that this is challenging for them to know that, hey, your solutions aren't being graded right or wrong, right? We are evaluating you based on some other things, analytical mindsets, design mindsets, more about the process than it is the actual product that they're creating. Yeah, in terms of those wicked issues, you might just consider designing rubrics, finding rubrics online that do evaluate the process rather than the product in the end.
Excellent. And it's 5:02 now, and it's been a long day. I see some people tired. So let's stop there. But thank you so much, Ben. That was really good stuff. I appreciate that.
Excellent. Thank you all for having me and for listening. And it was great to be with y'all today.
Excellent. I saw lots of nuggets showing up over there in the chat, so that's really cool. And yeah. So before people bolt too quickly here, if you are available and want to chat this evening, grab a beverage. 8 o'clock, we'll chat a little bit about how we find resources across campus. Those you can't, that's totally fine. And we will see you next week. You have a week now to recover from all the stuff you learned today and figure out how to implement it. And then also don't forget the asynchronous sessions too. You can log in and do those whenever you'd like. But great seeing y'all today. Look forward to seeing y'all next week.
Oh.
That's interesting.